Get that car out of here. Now. The voice cut through the morning air like a siren, sharp, commanding, disrespectful. It came from a uniformed officer standing at the entrance of the South Precinct, the squat brick building in the heart of the city. His hand hovered near his hip, not on his gun, but close enough to send a message. The engine of the McLaren purred low, silky, almost amused. The driver's door lifted upward gullwing style. A polished Oxford shoe stepped out first. Then a man in a tailored gray suit, calm, silent, black. He adjusted his cufflinks splatium, subtle, his face unreadable. "Sir, you're in a restricted area." The officer barked. "You can't park this circus here. Move it." No smile, no hostility either, just patience. He raised his eyes slowly. "I'm here for a meeting." That only made things worse. A second officer joined. "You here to bail someone out? Because that ain't how you show up to a precinct." Behind them, a few staff leaned in windows, watching. One chuckled. Another pulled out a phone. Someone muttered, "Show off." Another said, "Drug dealer's nephew, maybe." The man didn't respond. He just reached into his inside jacket pocket. Immediately, the first officer stepped forward. "Keep your hands where I can see them." The gesture froze, not fear, just recognition of the weight carried by his skin color and assumptions. What would you do if showing up successful made you look suspicious? What would run through your mind if every step you took toward a public building triggered hostility? Because that's exactly what he felt. Not anger, not yet, but something deeper. That old ache. The one that says, you can own the world and still not be welcomed on your own street. He took a breath. "I'm here to speak with your captain." This, he gestured calmly to the car, "is not a crime." But the uniformed man smirked, took a slow step forward, and said under his breath, "People like you don't walk in with toys like that unless you're hiding something." The McLaren sat there gleaming under the rising sun, metallic curves catching every golden beam. But inside the precinct, tension was already rising. He could hear the whispers, the murmurs. Who is he? Why isn't he leaving? Call someone. And still, he didn't flinch. "Let me ask you something. If you walked into a place of power, fully within your rights, and were told to leave just because you didn't look right, what would you do?" Comment below with just one word: stay or go. Because that moment, that pause, was exactly when everything started shifting. But next, he would do something that no one expected. He'd take a step forward. He'd reach for a pen. And when he finally signed that check, well, let's just say, jaws weren't just dropping. They were snapping shut in shame. But that wasn't even the worst part. Stick around, because in part 2, you'll see exactly how deep this prejudice ran and why his silence was more powerful than any badge in that building. The envelope hit the ground before he could finish his sentence. A crisp ivory letter embossed with a city seal slid across the concrete like trash in the wind. The officer didn't even look at it. "I don't care who sent you," he sneered. "Next time, try using the front entrance like normal folks." The crowd around the precinct doors wasn't a crowd anymore. It was a silent jury, frozen, watching, judging. Someone behind the front desk coughed. Another whispered, "I think he said he had a meeting." The man in the gray suit looked down at the letter now crumpled at his feet. No rush to pick it up. No anger on his face. Just that same silence, cold like steel. He bent down slowly, brushed the dust off the envelope, and stood back up. "I was invited," he said, voice even, "by your captain." "Captain's busy," the cop shot back, "and you are wasting my time." Then came the real sting. The second officer leaned against the squad car, arms crossed. "Let me guess," he smirked. "You're one of those social media entrepreneurs, influencers in rented cars." The first laughed, "Right? Probably filming some TikTok prank." That's when it hit him. Not just the insult, but the deep, familiar ache. The one that whispered, even now they only see the car, not the man. The leather, not the legacy. The skin, never the story. Have you ever been talked down to by someone who had no idea who you really were? Like they mistook your silence for weakness? Your kindness for permission? It stings, doesn't it? The man took one step forward, not fast, not confrontational, just deliberate. And suddenly, both officers stiffened. He pulled out a second envelope, black, sleek, with gold trim, handed it to the second officer. Open it, he said, calm as water. The man hesitated. What is this? An agreement, signed, approved, for the expansion of this precinct. They tore it open and stopped breathing. A check, payable to the city, $2 million, signed. Below the signature, founder, Struck Holdings, strategic advisor to the mayor. The color drained from the first officer's face. His mouth open, closed, no sound. But the silence only made the truth louder. Inside, through the tinted windows of the precinct, someone bolted upright. A woman in uniform. She stared through the glass, then disappeared from view. And that's when the door finally opened. The captain himself stepped out. What the hell is going on here? He asked, already knowing something was wrong. The man in the suit didn't turn. He just looked ahead, eyes steady, still holding the crumpled invitation. He didn't need to yell, didn't need to explain, because every whisper behind him had already changed. Wait, that's him. Omnistruct. No way. Let me ask you something. Have you ever watched someone realize at a Latif that they just insulted the wrong person? If you were him, would you accept their apology or let the silence say everything? Comment below, accept or walk away. Because what came next wouldn't just silence the precinct, it would shift the power in the entire city. And that's exactly why you need to hear what happened inside that office, what the captain said, what he offered, and how, with one sentence, the black CEO took control of the room without raising his voice. The captain's boots echoed as he crossed the concrete floor, heavy, deliberate, trying to reassert control. But no one was fooled. Not the clerks frozen at their desks, not the junior officers lining the hallway, and definitely not the man in the suit. He didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't even offer his hand. Sir, the captain began, voice tight with forced politeness, if there's been any misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding, the CEO said quietly. The room held its breath. Your men saw a car. They saw skin. They didn't ask a single question. The silence cracked louder than any shout. One of the officers from earlier tried to speak. We didn't know. But the captain raised a hand, cutting him off. That's enough. The man in the suit stepped forward slowly. He placed the crumpled letter on the captain's desk like evidence. My team reached out weeks ago. Your department requested assistance with funding the new trauma response unit. We agreed. Today was our scheduled walkthrough. The captain shifted, clearly caught. The weight of real power pressed into the room like gravity. Behind him, one of the junior staffers pulled up the email log. The CEO's name was there, cleared, flagged for special access. The email was labeled, confirmed, strategic donor visit July 9th. He waited, not for an apology, not for some speech, just to see how long they'd sit in their own discomfort. Because sometimes silence is the punishment. But still hadn't come for war, not today. He let the captain squirm for another few seconds. Then finally, he said, "Shall we begin the tour?" It was the captain's turn to nod, subdued. Yes, of course. As they moved through the precinct, everything changed. The same officers who mocked him now walked the steps behind. The same desks where whispers flew were now straightened, their owners looking busy, avoiding eye contact. It wasn't just respect, it was realization. He wasn't just a donor, he was the future of their funding. He could have burned this place to the ground with a phone call, and instead, he stayed. Let me ask you something. If you had the power to humiliate those who humiliated you, but chose not to, how would that make you? Weak, or something much stronger? Type strong if you believe restraint is power, or revenge if you'd give them what they deserve. Because just when you think this man had shown the extent of his control, he did something no one expected. He paused in front of the precinct's mission plaque, the one engraved with the words, integrity, service to quality. And he turned. Captain, he said softly. Those words don't mean much on metal. He reached into his coat one final time, pulled out a folded form, and handed it over. A funding revision. Clause 7B. Mandatory bias training for all precinct officers, supervised by independent auditors. Clause 8A. Funding is contingent on full staff compliance. Clause 9C. Monthly public transparency report signed by the strategic advisor to the mayor. The captain blinked. You still want to fund us? He asked. The CEO just smiled, the kind of smile that's been sharpened by years of being underestimated. I don't want to fund you, he said. I want to fix you. And that was just the beginning, because in part 4, you'll see what happened when the city press got wind of the confrontation. How this man's silence turned into a headline that made national news. But before we get there, I know life's busy. Maybe you're watching this between errands. Maybe your break's almost over. If you need to go, hit subscribe so YouTube reminds you to finish this later. You won't want to miss the twist that shook this precinct and the city wide open. Before I tell you what happened when the headlines exploded, I know you might be busy. Maybe someone's calling. Maybe your break's almost up. But if stories like this grab you, stories where the quiet man holds all the power, go ahead and hit subscribe now. Because in this next part, his silence doesn't just change one precinct. It starts to shake the whole city. By 4:13 p.m., the story had leaked. A reporter from the local paper got hold of a staffer who'd been watching from behind the glass and who couldn't stop talking. She walked right into our office. She said, dropped the quote like it was nothing. The quote spread like wildfire. I don't want to fund you. I want to fix you. By 5:47 p.m., 3 different news outlets had picked it up. By 6:12 p.m., it was trending on Twitter. And that was before anyone even knew the man's name. The clip of him stepping out of the McLaren calm, slow, perfectly dressed was already circulating. Shot from someone's phone. No yelling, no fists, no drama. Just presence. And presence, when earned, is louder than protest. You ever notice that? That some people don't need to raise their voice to take over the room. It wasn't until Channel 8 News dug deeper that they realized who he was. Founder of one of the largest logistics tech firms in the tri-state area. Fortune 500 board advisor. One of the top donors behind the mayor's re-election campaign. And yet the previous recipient of the Community Justice Award. Yeah, the man they kicked out for arriving in a McLaren? He literally built the city's crisis response protocol after the 2022 floods. That's when things started unraveling fast. The mayor's office released a statement. We're aware of the incident involving Mr. Bennett, our strategic advisor and a valued contributor to public policy reform. We are taking this matter very seriously. The precinct went silent online. No tweets, no comments. Internally, panic. The 2 officers involved were temporarily reassigned. Emergency meetings were called. You ever seen an institution scramble to save face when they realized they humiliated the one man, holding their future in his hands? What would you do if the people who looked down on you suddenly had to depend on you to survive? Would you walk away? Would you gloat? Or would you rebuild it on your terms? Comment build if you'd use your power to rewrite the rules, or burn if you'd rather let it collapse. Because what Mr. Bennett did next was neither. That night, he was invited to speak on a late-night panel show. He wore the same suit, same calm voice, same deadly patience. And when the host asked him, why didn't you sue? Why didn't you go public yourself? He leaned forward just slightly, not angry, just clear. Because I don't want to punish systems, he said. I want to reprogram them. His phone buzzed with offers, advisory positions, partnerships. One major firm offered to fund the entire precinct overhaul if he took the lead. But he didn't answer any of them, because his next move wasn't about influence. It was about something much deeper, something that started decades ago. And in part 5, I'll take you back to the moment a teenage Eric Bennett was pulled over for riding a bike in the wrong neighborhood. The memory that taught him silence could be sharper than rage. And the vow he made that night, to one day stand where the system couldn't touch him. Let me take you back to how it all started. It was the summer of 1996. The sun beat down hard on cracked sidewalks in South Fairview kind of neighborhood, where he'd hung in the air like judgment. Eric Bennett was 13, tall for his age, quiet, always pedaling too fast, like he was racing some invisible clock. That day, he borrowed an old 10-speed bike from a neighbor, nothing fancy, just enough to feel free. He rode across town, past the invisible lines people pretended didn't exist, blocks that turned from boarded windows to manicured lawns in less than a minute. He wasn't doing anything wrong. No headphones, no tricks, just riding. Then came the flash of red and blue in his peripheral vision. A cruiser, pulling up fast. You ever have a moment that stays in your chest for years, where time slows, but your heart races? The window rolled down. "Where'd you get the bike?" the officer asked. Eric blinked. "To borrowed it from Marcus, apartment 3B. Step off the bike." The voice was firm, unfriendly. He obeyed, hands on the hood. The metal was burning hot. He flinched. "Don't move." Gloved hands patted him down, rough, no explanation. Another officer appeared, radio in hand. "He matches the description," he muttered. Eric wanted to ask, "What description?" But even at 13, he knew better. They asked no more questions. They didn't call Marcus. They just opened the cruiser door. And in that moment, with the whole street watching, felt something snap. Not his pride, his belief. His belief that if he played by the rules, the world would treat him fairly. That if he stayed quiet, stayed good, he'd be safe. He sat in the back seat, staring at the wire mesh in front of him, wondering, why didn't they see me? Why did they only see what they feared? You ever been there? Not in a cruiser, maybe, but in a moment where someone looked straight at you and saw something you weren't. Common scene if you've ever felt invisible or misjudged, if someone once got you all wrong. They released him an hour later. No apology, no explanation. Just be careful where you ride, kid. He never forgot that. Didn't cry, didn't rage. But that night, he wrote something in a notebook he never showed anyone. A sentence, just one. "One day I'll walk into every room they said I didn't belong in." And from that day forward, he wasn't just smart. He was relentless. Scholarship after scholarship, night jobs, coding boot camps, business school by 21. First startup sold at 23. Every deal, every investor pitch, every sleepless night, rooted in the promise he made the day that they would see him, not because he raised his voice, but because they couldn't ignore him anymore. And that's why, decades later, when he stood calmly at the front desk of that police precinct, it wasn't his first confrontation with blind authority. It was the full circle moment he'd been building towards since age 13. But the next part, that was where things got personal. Because in part 6, the very officer who humiliated him came back into the story. Not in uniform, but begging for something far more human. Forgiveness. You won't believe what he asked, or what Eric said in return. It was 3 weeks later. Eric was standing at the back of a community event, nothing flashy. Just a town hall discussion on public safety and youth mentorship. He wasn't on the stage. He'd already spoken, already handed over a 7-figure donation. Now, he stood by the exit, speaking quietly with a few organizers, sipping black coffee from a paper cup. And that's when he saw him. The same officer. The one who tossed the envelope onto the ground like it was junk mail. But this time no badge, no uniform, no swagger. Just khakis and a blue polo shirt, head low, hands clutched. Eric noticed him before the man noticed Eric, and for a second he considered walking away. Not out of fear, out of mercy. But he didn't move, because sometimes people need to look you in the eye, not for your sake but for their own. The man looked up, froze. Then, slowly he approached. "Mr. Bennett," he said, voice rough. "Do you have a minute?" Eric didn't answer, just looked at him. The man swallowed hard. "Yeah, I just wanted to say I saw the interview. The one you did on Channel 8. Eric nodded once, still silent. The man kept going, nervously. "I've been thinking a lot. about how I handled things the day at the precinct. You mean when you dismissed me before I spoke? Eric's voice was calm, measured, but sharp as glass. The officer winced. Yeah, that, among other things. There was a long pause. Then the man reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded photo. It was old, faded, curled at the edges. A boy on a BMX bike, smiling wide. My son, the man said softly. He's 15 now. Mixed. His mom's black. He looked up, eyes damp. And last week he got stopped. Outside a store. He goes to every day. They thought he was stealing. He wasn't. The silence between them was electric. He came home, and he looked at me the way I know I once looked at people like you. Eric said nothing, but his gaze didn't soften. I guess I'm saying the man's voice cracked. I get it now. I didn't then. But I do now, and I'm sorry. He offered his hand. Eric looked at it. Just looked. Let me ask you, what would you do if the man who once treated you like you didn't matter now stood in front of you, stripped of all rank, asking not just for forgiveness, but for understanding? Would you shake his hand or walk away? Come and forgive if you believe people can change, or never if some things should never be forgotten. Eric didn't shake his hand. Not yet. Instead, he asked, "What are you doing here?" The man blinked. I signed up to volunteer. They needed help with youth mentoring. I figured maybe I could listen for once. Eric studied him, not the face, the posture, and then said quietly, "You want to do better." "Yes, I do." "Then don't apologize to me. Apologize to the next kid before they have to become me." And with that he turned and walked away, leaving the man standing there, photo in hand, tears he didn't try to hide. Because forgiveness isn't always a handshake. Sometimes it's a mirror. But what happened next would shake Eric in a way even that moment couldn't. Because in part 7, a letter would arrive at his officino return address. Inside was a name from his past. A name he hadn't heard since the night everything fell apart. It came in a plain white envelope. No return address. Just his name, typed in small letters. Eric D. Bennett. It sat on his desk for hours. His assistant thought it was nothing. Another invite. Maybe a thank you note. She left it atop a stack of contracts. But the moment Eric saw it, something inside him stilled. He didn't know why, didn't know how, but the paper felt heavy. He opened it slowly. Inside, a single sheet of paper. 2 lines, 1 name, and no explanation. Jerome Carter still remembers the night. He never stopped looking for you. Eric's hands froze. His chest didn't move. For a long moment, he just stared at the words. Not printed, typed, old typewriter ink, slightly misaligned letters. Jerome Carter. He hadn't heard that name in 27 years. Let me take you back. They were kids, both 13, back when Eric still believed friendships were forever. Jerome was his best friend, rode bikes with him, shared sandwiches with him, protected him, until that one night, the night Eric was pulled into the cruiser and Jerome wasn't. The officers only took one of them, only questioned one of them. And when Eric got out hours later, Jerome was gone, vanished. No explanation, no goodbye, just absence. Eric had spent months trying to find him. But in a world without smartphones, without social media, without power, sometimes absence becomes erasure. He buried it, moved on, or so he thought. But now, this letter, this one name, ripped open something buried under success and silence. He stared at it again. Jerome Carter still remembers the night. What did that mean? Was it regret? Was it warning? Was it hope? Eric leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on the paper, and for the first time in years, he felt unmoored. He wasn't the man in the tailored suit anymore. He wasn't the CEO or the strategist. He was that kid again, sitting on a curb, waiting for someone who never came back. You ever feel that? Like your past isn't done with you. Like no matter how far you climb, some pieces of you stay trapped in a night long gone. What would you do if the one person who disappeared when you needed them most suddenly reached out? Would you follow that thread or let sleeping ghosts lie? Type reach out if you believe some doors should be reopened, or bury it if some silences are better left untouched. Eric didn't speak, didn't tell his team, didn't cancel his meetings. But that night, after the city slept, he sat in his study with that letter under a single desk lamp, and he began to write a name on a notepad. Not Jerome, another name, a name only to people alive would understand. Because to find Jerome, he had to revisit someone else, someone who'd promised they'd never speak of the night again. And in part 8, you'll see who that person is, and why opening that door might cost Eric more than he ever expected. Her name was Lorraine Knox. She used to live on the second floor of the building where Eric and Jerome spent their childhood summers jumping fire hydrants, dodging corner hustlers, chasing sunlight between chain-link fences. Lorraine was 16 back then, sharp-tongued, watchful. Everyone in the neighborhood called her Hawkeyes, because Lorraine didn't miss a thing. And on the night Eric got pulled into the cruiser, she was watching. But back then, she'd stayed silent. And now, after almost 3 decades, Eric needed her memory. Not the official version, not what the city filed. The truth. He found her the old-fashioned way through layers of whispers and borrowed favors. A retired teacher in a New York charter school. Still fierce. Still proud. Still didn't know anyone anything. She met him at a diner just off the highway. Booth by the window. Coffee black. Didn't think I'd see you again, she said, stirring sugar slowly. You turned out polished. Eric smiled faintly. You always said I'd either end up in cuffs or in Congress. She chuckled, still time for both. They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them not cold, just waited. Then Eric slid the envelope across the table. Her eyes scanned the paper, paused at the name. Jerome Carter. Her hand tightened on the spoon. You remember? He asked. She looked up, eyes sharp. Of course I remember. That night changed everything. You saw what happened. She nodded. I saw them take you, saw Jerome freeze. He didn't run, didn't move, just stood there like his soul left his body. Eric swallowed hard. He tried to get help, Lorraine said, knocked on doors. Yours, mine. The Garcias downstairs. No one opened. Everyone was scared. Cops were jumpy that summer. Eric leaned forward. Then what? He disappeared, she said, but not because he wanted to. She reached into her purse, pulled out an old photography load edges, tape on one corner. It showed Jerome, younger, smiling. But the back had something scribbled in red ink. Knox, if anything happens, tell Eric I didn't leave him. Eric's throat caught. I found that on my windowsill. Lorraine whispered. Day after you got taken, I kept it. Didn't know why. Why didn't you ever tell me? She looked away. Because we all thought he was dead. Eric's hand trembled as he turned the photo over again. The writing, it was definitely Jerome's. Suddenly, the typed letter made sense. Jerome hadn't just vanished. He'd been taken away. Not by death. By someone or something trying to erase what he saw that night. You ever wonder how many people disappear? Not because they're gone, but because someone made sure they stayed invisible. Would you dig deeper? Even if the truth risks shaking everything you've built. Comment dig if you believe some truths must be uncovered, no matter the cost. Or let go if you'd rather protect the life you have. Eric slid the photo into his jacket pocket. Looked Lorraine in the eyes. Do you know who took him? She hesitated. Then, with a voice like stone, she said, I don't know who, but I know where to start. And she pulled out an address, a name written in block letters. Detective Wallace Grant, retired, last precinct, South Fairview. Eric stared at it, because that name was on the original arrest report from 1996. And in part 9, he's going back to the one place he swore he'd never return to. The place where silence began. But this time, he's not 13, and he's not alone. The door creaked open slower than it should have. Old hinges, older house. A one-story brick home on the edge of South Fairview, faded siding. Overgrown lawn, but curtains still drawn neat. Detective Wallace Grant had retired 20 years ago, but the shadows around his name never did. Eric stood on the porch in silence, dressed not in power but in purpose. No suit, no bodyguards. Just a black turtleneck, dark jeans, and an envelope in his hand. He could have sent lawyers. He could have made calls. But some ghosts you face in person. The man who opened the door was smaller than memory. White, wrinkled, breathing heavy through a portable oxygen tube. But his eye-steel blue were still sharp. He didn't speak, didn't smile, just stepped aside. Eric entered. No pleasantries, no offer of coffee. They sat across from each other in a quiet living room. Wallpaper yellowing around old photos of police graduations and family barbecues. Then Eric placed the envelope on the table. Grant stared at it, then back at him. "You came all this way to ask about Jerome," the old man rasped. Eric's jaw tensed. "So you remember?" "I remember everything," Grant said, "because they made me remember every damn day." Eric's eyes narrowed. "They?" Grant gave a dry cough, then nodded toward the window blinds. "The brass, the boys upstairs. You think you were the only one they tried to erase." Eric stayed silent. Grant continued. "Jerome Carter, he wasn't taken because he ran. He was taken because he watched. He saw what we did to you. He asked questions, loud ones. He leaned forward, wheezing. And when a black kid starts asking questions in the wrong precinct, with no badge to protect him, they make him disappear." Eric's hands clenched. "And you let them?" Grant didn't flinch. "I was a coward," he said. "Thought I was protecting my pension, my house, my wife." He looked down. "But I buried a boy that night, not literally. Worse, I buried his voice." There was a long silence. Then Grant pulled a box from beneath the table. Old, locked. He opened it with a key that shook in his hand. Inside, reports, memos, photocopies, a cassette tape. "You're not the only one who kept receipts," he muttered. He slid it across. Eric opened the folder, and there buried beneath layers of police jargon was a copy of a transfer request, dated 3 weeks after the incident, signed by an unnamed party. Destination, a state juvenile center for counties away. Name, Jerome Carter, alias, unidentified minor for 7B. Eric blinked. They changed his name. They buried it under system codes, Grant said. Never filed it publicly. You'd never find him without this. Eric's throat tightened. Is he still alive? Grant looked away. I don't know. But if he is, you're the only one with a shot of finding him now. Let me ask you something. If someone handed you the truth after 3 decades of silence, would you use it? Even if it meant digging up pain no one else dared touch? Come and search if you'd follow the trail. Or stop if the cost is too high. Eric stood slowly, took the folder, the tape. He looked at Grant one last time. You're not forgiven, he said. But maybe you're finally useful. He walked out. The sun hit his face. But inside his chest an old storm began to rise. Because in part 10, Eric follows the paper trail. And what he finds next isn't just about Jerome. It's about a secret file tied to a program that was never supposed to exist. The folder smelled like old ink and rust. Eric laid its contents across his glass desk, documents stained yellow, dates faded, corners brittle with time. But what caught his eye wasn't the transfer form. It was the memo clip behind it. A single phrase in bold black ink. Project or EFRACT. Rehabilitation, extraction, federal reallocation, and containment training. It didn't sound like a youth program. It sounded like a cover. Eric leaned back in his chair. Beside the memo was the cassette tape Grant had given him. No label, just a piece of masking tape with August 1996 scribbled in red marker. He didn't have a cassette player, but he had connections, and in less than 6 hours, his team had it digitized. The voice on the tape, Jerome, 13 years old, scared, whispering. They told me I could go home if I kept quiet, but I saw what they did to Eric. I saw the cop push him. I saw the second one lie on the report. They told me I was being relocated to keep me safe, but I think they're hiding me. Please, if someone hears this, tell him I didn't run. Eric's chest tightened. That voice high, cracking, full of fear wasn't just a memory. It was a time capsule, a confession. A cry buried in bureaucratic silence. You ever stumble on proof so real, so raw, that it reorders how you remember everything? Like your worst suspicion wasn't paranoia, it was prophecy. He scanned the rest of the folder. References to a containment facility. Not a prison, but something close. A rehabilitation camp in upstate New York, decommissioned in early 2000. The official reports called it a behavioral reform center. But according to internal memos, it was used to re-educate minors whose knowledge could destabilize ongoing investigations. Eric sat with that sentence. Re-educate minors. That's what they called it. What they did to Jerome, and probably others. Let me ask you something. If the system didn't just fail you but actively tried to erase you, would you expose it? Even if it meant dragging powerful names into the light? Even if it meant risking everything you'd built? Comment expose if you'd blow the lid off it. Or protect if you'd rather keep your empire intact. Eric made his choice before the tape even finished. He stood, picked up his phone, dialed a number only 3 people in the city had. It rang once. Mayor Tallon speaking. Eric's voice was ice. We need to talk, not as friends, as men who've looked the other way long enough. There was silence on the line. Then, you found something, didn't you? I found everything. 2 hours later, Eric walked into City Hall with a folder under one arm. He didn't use the front door, didn't wait in the lobby. The security guards didn't even check him. Because when the system knows it's guilty, it doesn't question the man holding the evidence. But the conversation inside wasn't just about justice. It was about exposure. Because in Part 11, the mayor will offer him a deal. One that would bury the entire program. In exchange for something Eric never thought he'd consider. Power. Real power. The kind that comes with a seat behind the curtain. But the question is, will he take it? The mayor's office was too quiet. No aides, no press. Just Mayor Tallon standing by the window, staring down at the city as if it belonged to him. Eric stepped inside. No handshake, no smile. He dropped the folder on the glass table between them. You already know what's in there, Eric said, but you don't know what's next. Tallon turned, slow and calculated. He didn't look surprised. He looked tired. I had a feeling this would surface eventually, the mayor said, but not from you. Eric didn't blink. I didn't come here to ask for anything. Good, Tallon replied, because I'm not offering an apology. He walked over, opened the folder, skimmed the contents. The memo, the tape, the Project or Eat FERACT directive. He sighed. You realize if this leaks, it won't just take down the department. It'll scorch the entire administration. Half the people behind this are dead. The other half are donors, sitting senators, retired judges. I know, Eric said. That's why I'm here. The mayor paused, studied him. You want revenge? No. Then what? Eric leaned in. I want accountability, real reform, real audits, restitution for anyone buried by that program. Tallon raised an eyebrow. That's not a small request. I don't make small requests. The mayor nodded, then walked to a cabinet, pulled out a sealed envelope, slid it across the table. Or, he said, you take this. Eric didn't touch it. What is it? Tallon's voice lowered. A seat, not just at the table. Behind the curtain, policy advisor for statewide justice reform. Unlimited funding, no oversight. You rewrite the system your way quietly. Eric stared at the envelope, the weight of it, the silence beneath it. You're offering me power in exchange for silence. I'm offering you access, influence, leverage. If you go public, they'll bury you in litigation for years. You'll lose momentum, investors. The next mayor won't take your calls. And if I take this, you get to change things from the inside, slowly, permanently. There it was, the choice, not between good and evil, but between legacy and justice, between playing the game or flipping the damn table. Let me ask you something. If you could change the world quietly, methodically, permanently, but had to let the truth stay buried, would you do it? Or would you risk it all to make the system confess? Comment inside if you'd take the power. Or expose if the truth deserves the light. Eric picked up the envelope, felt the weight, The paper was thick. The offer was real. He looked the mayor dead in the eye. "You think I want to change this quietly?" Talon smirked. "I think you're too smart not to." Eric placed the envelope back down. "I didn't build everything I built just to sit in a bigger room and watch the same crimes happen." He stood. Talon straightened. "You'll regret this." Eric turned toward the door. "No," he said. "You will. Because in part 12, the silence finally ends. The press conference begins. And Eric doesn't just reveal the truth. He brings someone back no one ever expected to see." The press conference was scheduled for noon. By 11:37 a.m., the rotunda of City Hall was packed. Cameras perched like vultures on tripods. Reporters whispered rumors like gospel. Nobody knew what Eric Bennett was going to say. They just knew he wasn't here to play politics. The podium bore no city seal, no party banner, just a single black placard with white letters. "Truth isn't negotiable." At exactly 12 p.m., Eric stepped out from behind the curtain. No entourage, no notes, just the folder in his hand, the one with Jerem's name on it. He looked into the sea of faces: journalists, staffers, even a few officers from the same precinct that once threw him out. Flashbulb sparked. He waited, then spoke calm, clear. "No one here needs another speech about justice." He held up the folder. "What you need is proof." And with that, he placed the contents on the podium. The memo, the tape, the photo, everything. "My name is Eric Bennett," he continued. "I built companies, advised cities, funded the very departments meant to serve the people. But I'm here today not as a CEO, not as a donor. I'm here as a witness." He let those words sit. 29 years ago, a boy was taken not because he broke the law, but because he refused to stay silent. That boy's name was Jerome Carter, and the system tried to erase him. Gasps swept through the crowd. Reporters started scribbling furiously. "But they failed," Eric said. Then he turned, and from the wings slowly, silently a figure stepped out. Older now, shoulders broader, but face unmistakable. Jerome, alive, breathing, and broken. You could hear the oxygen leave the room. The cameras froze. A woman in the third row dropped her pen. Eric didn't speak. He didn't have to. Jerome stepped up to the mic. "I don't want revenge," he said, voice low, steady. "I want recognition." He paused, and not just for me, for every name that disappeared in a file, for every child labeled as a threat just because they remembered the wrong thing. Silence again, but this time thick with awe. "Let me ask you something. If someone stood in front of the world and told your buried story, would you feel rage or relief? Comment heard if you've waited too long to be understood, or rise if you believe silence must end now." Eric stepped forward, placed a hand on Jerem's shoulder. "This is not the end," he said. "This is the beginning." The room erupted, not into applause, but into reckoning. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras turned like rifles. But Eric walked off the stage quietly, Jerome beside him. Because justice, it didn't need an echo. It just needed a witness. And now, the city had one. You've just watched a story most people would bury. A story of power, of silence, of survival. But the real question is, what would you do if you were next?